Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. In the vast expanse of the Zoran cluster, where star systems collided and new empires rose and fell like dust, the planet Zartha was an anomaly. Its alien inhabitants, the Zothar, were a technologically advanced and biologically unique species. Tall, pale-skinned beings with 3 eyes and long, sinewy limbs, they were known for their grace in movement and the sophistication of their culture. But one truth set them apart. They were a dying species. It was in the aftermath of an interstellar war, fought across multiple systems, that Zartha's fate was sealed. While the Zothar fought bravely, they were struck by a pathogen, a biological weapon unleashed by a rival species. It ravaged the planet, wiping out most of their population. The few remaining survivors struggled to maintain their culture and rebuild their devastated world. And among them was one particularly unique individual, a widow named Ixara. Ixara had once been a warrior, fierce and strong, but now she was broken. The war had taken her husband, the love of her life, and left her alone to raise her 2 children. Her heart was heavy with grief, and her body bore the scars of countless battles fought to protect her people. But there was one thing she could not protect: her children's future. Her 2 children, a son and daughter, were the last hope of her species. They were young, barely out of adolescence, but already, the signs of the war's toll were evident in them. The plague had attacked their minds, and their immune systems were weak. They were dying, slowly, and there was nothing Ixara could do. Desperation gnawed at her every waking moment. She had tried everything to save them: alien medicine, advanced technology, and ancient healing rituals. Nothing worked. Her children were slipping away. That's when she had a thought, a desperate, dangerous thought. It was an idea whispered to her by a hidden faction of her people, a faction that still clung to old ways and believed in forbidden alliances. They spoke of a species, one far more resilient, far more capable of surviving the harshest of environments. A species that had fought wars of their own and emerged victorious. A species that could save her children. The humans. The Zothar knew of the humans, how they had spread across the galaxy, building alliances and crushing their enemies in ways that the Zothar envied. They had developed technologies that made them nearly invincible, and their societies, though young compared to the Zothar, were rich with culture and determination. Ixara had heard the rumors that humans were unlike any other species. Their resilience, their strength, their ability to adapt. If there was any chance left for her children, she had to ask the humans for help. But asking for help was one thing. What Ixara was about to do was another entirely. She had heard of human customs, their ways of interaction, but she knew nothing of their emotions or relationships. What would she have to offer in exchange for their help? She had heard of their complex family structures, their loyalty to one another. Her desperation led her to an idea, one that, at first, seemed like madness. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. "I need a mate," she whispered to herself, standing in front of the mirror in her chambers. Her 3 eyes reflected the sadness and exhaustion she had been carrying for years. But not just for companionship. "I need someone strong, someone who can help raise my children, someone who will fight for them." Ixara was certain of one thing. The human would have to be a mate, someone who could bond with her both emotionally and physically. It wasn't simply a union for survival, but a partnership born of shared sacrifice. A human male, if he could be found, would be her salvation and her children's. But the request she was about to make, the message she would send, would likely change the course of her life and possibly the fate of her entire species. And so, Ixara set her mind to sending a transmission to the nearest human fleet. Her communication device hummed to life, and her hands trembled as she typed the words, struggling with the human language she had studied for years. "Adopt my hungry children and be my mate, human." The alien widow's one wish. It was bold, but it was all she could offer in exchange for the impossible. She needed them to save her children, and she was willing to offer herself in return. The message, with its desperation and raw emotion, left her feeling vulnerable. But she knew there was no other choice. If the humans couldn't help, her children would perish, and her species would fade into oblivion. The message sent, Ixara sat back in her chair, her head in her hands. She had taken the first step, and now all she could do was wait. Somewhere, light years away, a human ship was receiving her message. The message from Ixara had reached the human fleet in the most unexpected way. It was not through a government channel or a high-ranking diplomat, as one might expect for a communication of such importance. No, the transmission was received by a small, out-of-the-way cruiser, the Ardent, a vessel carrying a diverse crew of explorers, mercenaries, and soldiers, all with their own reasons for being far from the core worlds of humanity. Captain Elena Quinn, a hardened veteran of countless battles, sat at the bridge, her fingers drumming lightly on the console. The Ardent was nearing the edge of the inhabited space of the galaxy, on a routine scouting mission for new resources and potential trade routes. But as she scanned the data incoming from her communication officer, something caught her eye. A garbled, distorted transmission with an alien signature. A message in broken English. "Captain, you might want to see this," Lieutenant Park said, his voice laced with curiosity and a hint of confusion. Elena leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the screen. Her brow furrowed as she read the words. "Adopt my hungry children and be my mate, human." The alien widow's one wish. Her first instinct was to dismiss it as a mistake, some kind of joke or error in translation. But the tone of the message was raw, urgent. There was no mistaking the desperation in the words. She felt something stir within her, something that went beyond simple intrigue. It was a deep, unspoken connection to the plea, an understanding of what it meant to lose something precious. The loss of a loved one, the struggle of a mother. Elena herself was no stranger to heartache. "Who sent this?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. Park quickly ran the signature analysis, the screen updating with the source's information. "It's from the Zoran cluster, an alien race called the Zothar. We've heard of them, Captain, but we've never made formal contact. They've been in decline for decades after the war." Elena stared at the words again, her heart heavy. A widow asking for a mate? For her children? The strange request seemed bizarre, but something about it felt genuine. Human. Her mind began to race, considering the possibilities. Was this an invitation to peace, to contact, to diplomacy? Or was it a desperate, perhaps misguided plea for help? "What do we do?" Park asked, his voice hesitant. Elena took a deep breath, her mind already calculating the odds. The Ardent wasn't the kind of ship equipped for diplomatic negotiations, but they were in a unique position to respond. The crew wasn't bound by the strict codes of the military. They could act on instinct, and Elena was no stranger to thinking outside the box. "We send a response," she said decisively. "Prepare a message, Lieutenant, and make sure the translation is perfect. I want them to know we're listening." She turned to her communications officer, Commander Garrick, who had been silent until now. His thick, salt and pepper beard and rugged demeanor made him seem impervious to anything but combat, but even he could sense the gravity of the situation. "A response, Captain?" Garrick asked, raising an eyebrow. Elena nodded. "Yes, we need to find out more, and we need to find out fast." The message was simple, clear, and respectful. An invitation to discuss the request further. Elena knew that it might not be enough, that the alien widow might be too desperate or too proud to accept anything less than immediate assistance. But this was the only way forward. The hours that followed were tense. The crew of the Ardent worked at full capacity, sending out their reply and awaiting a response. The ship drifted closer to the Zoran cluster, following the coordinates that Ixara's transmission had left behind. It was a slow journey, as the cluster lay far from known human-controlled space. But time was now a luxury they couldn't afford. Elena felt the weight of every second that passed. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the communications panel flashed again. Another transmission. The crew gathered at the bridge, staring at the screen in anticipation. This time it was a video feed. Ixara herself appeared, her face gaunt and her expression filled with a profound sorrow. Her 3 eyes shimmered with a mixture of determination and desperation. "Human," she said in perfect English, though her voice was thick with an alien accent. "You are the last hope of my children." She hesitated, as though weighing her words carefully. "You have seen the Zothar. You know our people are dying. My children, they are sick. They are the future of my kind. And if they are not saved, we will cease to exist." Elena's heart tightened as she listened to the alien widow's plea. The weight of her words sank deep, and she couldn't help but think of her own family, her own lost ones. She didn't know what Ixara's people had endured, but she could feel the intensity of her need. "I offer you this," Ixara continued, her voice trembling. "I offer myself in exchange for your help. Be my mate, adopt my children. Help us and we will serve you. We will help your people. But I do not have much time. My children's lives are slipping away." The message ended abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Elena leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had never expected anything like this. Plea for help, yes, but a request for something so deeply personal, so intimate? The implications were staggering. "This is unprecedented," Garrick said slowly. "What do we do, Captain?" Elena's gaze lingered on the screen, her fingers tapping on the armrest of her chair. Her instincts told her this was not something she could ignore. These were lives at stake, and it wasn't just any species asking for help. It was a species on the brink of extinction. "We help," she said, her voice resolute. "We've been given an opportunity here. We don't turn our backs on them. Set a course for Zartha. Prepare a landing party. We have work to do." The Ardent surged forward, its engines propelling them deeper into the unknown. The Ardent drifted toward the Zoran cluster, where Zartha, the dying homeworld of the Zothar, awaited. The crew was a mix of apprehension and determination, as no one truly knew what to expect. Captain Elena Quinn, though outwardly composed, couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would change everything. The desperate plea of the alien widow, Ixara, had struck a chord deep within her. She had seen enough war, enough loss, to recognize the rawness of a mother's grief, and Ixara's desperation had been palpable. But the idea of responding to such a request was unprecedented. Was this truly an act of diplomacy, or something far more personal, something that might change the fate of not just the Zothar, but the entire galaxy? On the bridge, Elena watched the glowing display of the star system on the view screen, the distant planet of Zartha visible as a small, faint in the distance. The journey had taken several weeks, the ship navigating through dangerous stretches of space, past nebulae and asteroid fields, each moment filled with uncertainty. Yet, as they neared their destination, the tension was thick. The crew was restless, and even Elena found it hard to focus. "Captain," Lieutenant Park's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. "We've arrived at the coordinates. Preparing to make contact." Elena stood, her spine straightening as she walked toward the command console. "Send a preliminary scan of the planet. Let's see what we're dealing with." The data began to pour in, and the scans revealed a world in turmoil. Zartha was a beautiful planet, but its beauty was marred by signs of decay. Its once vibrant cities were now reduced to crumbling ruins, and vast stretches of land appeared barren. The planet's ecosystems were dying. Once thriving forests now just stumps, once fertile soil reduced to dust. It was clear that the war and the plague had ravaged the land, leaving the Zothar struggling to survive in the ruins of their former glory. "This doesn't look good," Commander Garrick muttered, his voice laced with concern. "There's little life left on the surface. The planet's atmosphere is barely sustaining what's left of its population." Elena nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Prepare a landing party. We're going down." The Ardent entered the atmosphere of Zartha with a low hum, its engines cutting through the dense air. Elena stood at the forefront of the landing party, flanked by her trusted crew members, Garrick, Park, and a few other specialists. They were equipped with the latest protective suits, designed to shield them from any alien pathogens or environmental hazards. The alien species they were about to meet had been isolated for so long that there was no telling what diseases or toxins they might carry. As the ship touched down on the barren surface, the crew stepped out, their boots sinking into the ash-covered ground. The landscape was desolate, the once proud cities reduced to rubble, with only the skeletons of towering structures remaining. The air was thin, carrying the faint scent of decay. The sky above was a dull gray, heavy with the burden of unrelenting storms. Ixara had warned them of the harsh conditions, but the reality was far worse than they had expected. There was a palpable silence in the air, as though the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something that might never come. They were met by a small contingent of Zothar, tall, pale beings with their distinctive 3 eyes, their once vibrant forms now gaunt and fragile. The group's leader was unmistakable, Ixara herself. She stood before them, her eyes reflecting the weight of the world she carried. She looked nothing like the warrior she must have once been. Her face was drawn, her skin pale and sallow, her limbs weak from years of struggle. Yet, there was a fire in her gaze, a determination that cut through the pain. Elena stepped forward, extending a hand in greeting. Ixara regarded it for a moment before reaching out with her own, her touch cold but firm. "You came," Ixara said, her voice still thick with her accent. "I did not expect it. You are the first to answer my call." Elena studied her, searching for any sign of the desperation that had echoed in Ixara's message. There was only quiet resolve now. "We came to help. Tell us what we can do." Ixara hesitated before responding, her 3 eyes darting between Elena and the others. She then motioned for them to follow, leading them toward a structure that seemed to have once been a grand palace, though it now appeared more like a dilapidated shelter. As they moved deeper into the compound, they saw the truth of the Zothar's suffering. Small, sickly children huddled in the corners, their bodies frail and their eyes dull. Some adults moved about, but there was no life in their movements. Their once proud civilization was crumbling in real time, and Ixara was the last hope. "Why don't you tell us what happened?" Elena asked, her voice softer now, her eyes scanning the children with concern. Ixara's expression darkened, and she led them into a room that was lined with medical equipment. Some of it was alien in design, but most of it appeared outdated, barely functional. "The war," Ixara began, "was only the beginning. We were betrayed by one of our own, an insidious faction that unleashed a plague upon us, killed most of our people. The survivors, including my children, have been left with only a fraction of the strength we once had." Her eyes turned to her 2 children, lying on a bed in the far corner of the room. Both of them were barely conscious, their once vibrant forms now mere shadows of what they should have been. "They were dying, no question about it. They are the last of my kind," Ixara whispered, her voice breaking as she turned away from them. "If they die, the Zothar will be gone. And I will have failed them." Elena's heart clenched as she watched the 2 children, their faces pale, their bodies racked with the effects of the sickness. The plea in Ixara's voice was undeniable. "We will do everything we can," Elena said firmly, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "You're not alone anymore." As the team of human and Zothar worked side by side, setting up medical equipment and analyzing possible treatments, Elena couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something far greater than just saving 2 children. It felt like an opportunity to heal not just the Zothar, but the rift between their species. The future of Zartha was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Elena felt a glimmer of hope. The mission was just beginning, and already the stakes had never been higher. The makeshift medical facility on Zartha was quiet, save for the hum of equipment and the soft, anxious murmurs of the human and Zothar medics as they worked tirelessly to stabilize Ixara's children. Elena Quinn stood at the edge of the room, her arms folded across her chest, watching the scene unfold with a deep sense of responsibility. The stakes were higher than she had anticipated. This wasn't just a matter of diplomacy or extending humanitarian aid. It felt personal now. The future of an entire species rested on the fragile shoulders of 2 children. Her mind, usually focused on tactical decisions and military strategy, was now consumed with the weight of the task at hand. They had no guarantee that the treatment would work. The Zothar's sickness was unlike anything the human doctors had encountered. No matter how advanced their technology, they were still dealing with an alien pathogen whose nature they didn't fully understand. It was a race against time, and there was no room for failure. As she watched Ixara move toward the bed where her children lay, Elena couldn't help but notice the alien widow's exhaustion. The Zothar woman's once strong frame now seemed frail, as though the years of grief and the burden of responsibility had worn her down beyond measure. Her 3 eyes, once filled with the determination of a warrior, now appeared clouded with sorrow. Elena walked over and placed a hand gently on Ixara's shoulder. The alien woman looked up, her expression a mix of gratitude and pain. "You're doing everything you can," Elena said softly. "But if this doesn't work, we'll find another way. We'll help you." Ixara's gaze met Elena's, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. "You do not understand. My people are not simply dying from this illness. We have been failing for generations. And now I have no more choices. I can only ask you one thing. Will you take me as your mate, human? I cannot offer you riches or power. I offer only my service and my loyalty. And I offer my children, who will be yours if you accept." The words hung in the air like a charged current. Elena wasn't sure if she was hearing this correctly. Was Ixara truly offering herself, not just as a mate, but as a servant, in exchange for her children's lives? It was a gesture that carried immense cultural weight. It wasn't just an offer of companionship or union. It was a bond, a shared responsibility. To accept it would mean taking on the mantle of guardian and protector for an entire species, for its future, its legacy. Elena's voice faltered, and she took a step back, giving herself a moment to process. "I didn't come here to ask for that. I came to help. And I told you we will do everything we can to save your children. But this, I didn't expect." Ixara's eyes softened, as though she understood Elena's hesitations. "I do not ask this lightly. My people have always been proud, and the thought of depending on another species for our survival is humbling. But you are our last hope, and I need more than just help. I need a partner who can protect them, who can give them a future. I cannot do it alone anymore." The weight of her words was undeniable. Elena looked at the 2 children again, thin, pale, and fragile. They were the last of the Zothar's bloodline. If they died, so too would their entire species. It wasn't just the physical health of the children at stake, but the survival of a culture, a civilization, a people. Ixara's children were the key to preserving what remained of the Zothar. But accepting this offer would change everything. Elena would be bound to the Zothar, not just as a leader of a rescue mission, but as a family, a protector. Could she do that? Could she offer herself to a species that was so different from humanity, in a way that would bind them together across the vast cultural divide? Ixara seemed to sense the conflict in Elena's heart. "You don't have to decide now," she said quietly. "I only ask that you think about it. This is my last wish. I will not pressure you, but I will need your answer soon." The silence that followed was thick, and Elena could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her. She glanced at her team, who were focused on their tasks, and then back to Ixara. The alien widow had entrusted her with the fate of her children, and in doing so had revealed the deepest, most vulnerable part of herself. She was offering Elena not just her loyalty, but a shared future. Elena's mind was racing, torn between her duty as a captain and the complexities of the personal offer being made to her. She had never been one to shy away from responsibility, but this was something far more profound. She had already pledged her loyalty to the human people, to the Ardent and its mission. Could she truly accept this offer, knowing what it would mean for her life, her future, and the balance between 2 species? "Captain," Garrick's voice broke through the silence. He had approached quietly, sensing Elena's internal conflict. "You should know the treatment is working. It's slow, but the children's vitals are stabilizing. They're not out of danger yet, but they're holding on." Elena's heart swelled with relief, but the weight of the decision still pressed down on her. She nodded in acknowledgement, but her gaze never wavered from Ixara. "I'm glad to hear that," Elena replied, her voice steady but distant. She turned back to Ixara, her expression softening. "But even if the children survive, we can't rush into any decisions. I need time to understand this. Understand what it would mean for both our species. Ixara nodded, a look of understanding crossing her face. Of course, Captain. I will not push you. But know this, if you do not take this step, we will be lost. And I will lose my children. Elena felt her heart tighten. There was so much more at play here than she had initially realized. This wasn't just about a dying species or a diplomatic mission. It was about life itself. The Zothar had been pushed to the brink of extinction. Their people had endured so much, and now, the future of everything they had built rested in her hands. And in a way, the future of humanity was intertwined with theirs. Thank you for your honesty, Elena said, her voice more resolute now. We'll figure this out. Together. Ixara bowed her head slightly, a gesture of gratitude. Thank you, Captain. As Elena turned back toward her team, she couldn't shake the feeling that her decision was already made. The mission was far from over, and there were still countless obstacles ahead. But somehow, she knew that her life and the future of both species would never be the same. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The Ardent's medical team worked tirelessly, using every resource at their disposal to stabilize the Zothar children. Elena Quinn spent long hours by their side, overseeing the treatment and monitoring the progress. Despite the steady improvements, there was a constant tension in the air, a sense of uncertainty that gnawed at her. The children were still fragile, and though their vitals were improving, the truth remained. They were not yet out of danger. And then there was Ixara. Elena had spent many hours speaking with her, learning more about the Zothar, their culture, and the depths of their desperation. Ixara's grief and determination were raw and unfiltered, and Elena felt it in her bones. The alien widow had entrusted her with more than just her children's lives. She had offered a piece of herself, a bond that was both fragile and powerful, one that carried with it an enormous responsibility. In quiet moments, Elena found herself torn between the demands of the mission and the personal weight of Ixara's offer. The question she had been asking herself for days remained unanswered. Could she truly accept Ixara's request? To take her as a mate was not just an offer of companionship. It was a commitment to the survival of an entire species, a partnership that would bind their futures together in ways that Elena had never imagined. As the hours passed, the Ardent continued its work on the surface of Zartha, trying to give the Zothar a chance at survival. Yet, with each passing day, the pressure to make a decision grew heavier. Elena knew that Ixara's hope was not something that could be left hanging indefinitely. The alien widow needed an answer, and the sooner Elena made her decision, the better, for both of them. One afternoon, as the team continued their work on the surface, Elena found herself standing alone on the ruined balcony of the Zothar Palace. The view stretched out before her, showing the barren wasteland that had once been a thriving, vibrant world. The wind whispered through the crumbling ruins, carrying with it the echoes of the past, the memories of a civilization that had once been strong and proud, now reduced to ashes. Elena leaned against the stone railing, her arms crossed as she watched the horizon. Her mind raced as she considered the weight of her choices. The Zothar had been brought to the brink of extinction by war, betrayal, and a plague that had claimed the lives of so many. Ixara had lost everything: her mate, her people, her dignity. And now, she was offering herself, offering everything she had left, in exchange for Elena's help. A soft step behind her broke her reverie, and Elena turned to find Ixara standing a few paces away. Her expression was calm, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes that Elena couldn't ignore. "You've been thinking," Ixara said, her voice quiet. "I can feel it in your heart." Elena didn't deny it. "I've been thinking about everything," she replied. "About the Zothar, about your people, about what you've lost. About what you're asking me to do." Ixara stepped closer, her gaze intense. "You do not need to accept immediately, but you must understand what it means. If you agree, we will forge a bond, one that transcends our species. It will be a promise of protection, of survival, for my children, for my people, for our future. But it is not a decision that can be made lightly." Elena nodded slowly. She had spent hours contemplating the implications of Ixara's offer. And yet, there was still so much she didn't know. What would it mean for her own life, her own future, to take this step? She was no stranger to responsibility, but this was different. This was a union between two species, a commitment to a people whose ways were so vastly different from her own. I understand the gravity of what you're asking, Elena said, but this isn't just about saving your children. It's about saving your species. I don't know if I'm the right person for this, Ixara. I'm not a savior. I'm a soldier. Ixara's gaze softened, and she reached out, her hand brushing against Elena's. You are more than a soldier, Captain Quinn. You have already shown me your heart. You have shown me the depth of your compassion. And that is why I believe you can help us. The Zothar have no future without someone who will protect us, guide us, and stand by our side. I offer you not just my service, but my loyalty and my love. Together, we can rebuild what we've lost. Elena felt the weight of the offer in every word, and for the first time, something inside her shifted. The notion of love, of a bond, felt like an impossible thing to grasp, especially under these circumstances. But Ixara wasn't just offering love. She was offering a partnership, one that would carry with it the weight of a broken people and the chance for a new beginning. Elena took a deep breath and turned her gaze to the horizon once more. The future of the Zothar was uncertain, but in that moment, Elena realized that her own future could be just as uncertain, if not more so. She had always fought for a cause, but this was something different. This was a choice to fight for the survival of a people who had already lost so much. And perhaps it was a choice to create something new, something beyond the boundaries of war and survival. I don't know what the future holds, Elena said, her voice soft but steady. But I can't walk away from this. I can't leave you all to fade into the past. Ixara's eyes shone with hope, and she stepped closer, placing her hand firmly in Elena's. Then we will rebuild. Together. The days that followed were filled with new purpose. The children began to recover slowly but steadily, their strength returning as the treatments from the Ardent's medical team took hold. Elena continued to work alongside the Zothar, helping them to restore their world in whatever way she could. It was slow, painstaking work, but with each passing day, there was a sense of hope, a sense that the future might be brighter than it had seemed just a short while ago. But for Elena, there was more than just the restoration of a world. There was the promise of something deeper, something more profound. She had made her decision. She had chosen to accept Ixara's offer, not just as a duty, but as a bond between two people, two species, who had both known loss and who were now willing to fight for something greater. As she stood beside Ixara, looking out over the barren landscape that was slowly beginning to show signs of life once more, Elena knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The path ahead would be long and difficult, but it would be one they would walk together. And for the first time in a long while, Elena Quinn felt a sense of peace, of hope for the future. The weeks following Elena's decision had been marked by a quiet, yet powerful shift. The atmosphere on Zartha had transformed from one of utter despair to a tentative hope. The children, Ixara's last remaining kin, were slowly regaining strength, their bodies no longer withering under the effects of the plague. The planet, though still scarred, had begun to show signs of life, albeit faint, tentative signs, as the combined efforts of the Ardent crew and the Zothar medics began to bring about a fragile renewal. But beneath the surface of progress, the undercurrents of tension were impossible to ignore. Elena had pledged herself to Ixara, to the Zothar, but the decision had rippled outward, far beyond the walls of the crumbling palace. Her commitment had not gone unnoticed, and whispers had begun to circulate through the galaxy. Zothar society, once dominated by warriors and scholars, was not built to embrace outsiders, let alone humans. To accept Elena as a mate, even as a gesture of survival, had been viewed with mixed reactions by the Zothar people. While some saw it as a necessary bond, a symbol of hope in their time of desperation, others viewed it as a betrayal. To unite with another species, even in the direst of circumstances, was a deeply controversial step. Elena knew that her decision had consequences, political, cultural, and personal, but it wasn't until the day the storm came that she fully realized just how volatile those consequences could be. The storm appeared without warning. One moment, the skies were a dull gray, the air thick with humidity. The next, violent winds tore through the ruins of Zartha's capital city. The atmosphere seemed to crackle with tension as swirling clouds, dark and ominous, spiraled toward the surface. It was the first major storm in years, a sign that the planet's environment, long in decline, was now spiraling into its own chaos. On the bridge of the Ardent, Elena stood at the command console, watching the swirling maelstrom on the viewscreen. The sensors had picked up strange, seismic activity from the planet's core, further disturbing the delicate balance that had been slowly restored. The storm was not just a natural phenomenon, it was a harbinger of something far worse. "Captain," Lieutenant Park's voice cut through the tension. "I've detected an unusual energy signature coming from the northern hemisphere. It's faint, but the readings are concerning." Elena frowned. "What kind of signature?" Park's fingers danced over the console, bringing up a series of data points. "It's hard to say exactly, but it seems like some kind of radiation. It could be coming from deep underground, or from a hidden facility." Elena's eyes narrowed. "We need to investigate. Prepare a team for deployment. If there's something buried beneath the surface, we need to know about it." Garrick, standing beside her, shot her a glance. "Captain, if this storm is the result of some kind of destabilizing technology, we might be dealing with more than just environmental collapse. We could be looking at an active weapon, something left behind by the Zothar's enemies." The thought sent a shiver down Elena's spine. If an enemy faction had hidden a weapon deep within the planet's crust, it could explain the planet's environmental instability, the sudden surge of radiation, and even the plague that had decimated the Zothar. It was a terrifying prospect, but it was one they had to confront. "Get the team ready," Elena ordered, "and make sure the Ardent is on standby for extraction. We don't know what we'll be walking into." The team was ready within the hour. Elena, Ixara, Garrick, and a small squad of human and Zothar personnel boarded a transport shuttle and descended into the heart of the storm. The atmosphere was oppressive, thick with the weight of unrelenting wind and torrential rain. The northern hemisphere was nothing like the once proud cities they had encountered. This region was far more desolate, its landscape littered with the remnants of forgotten technology and ancient ruins. The shuttle touched down in a clearing, surrounded by jagged rocks and the remnants of an old Zothar military installation. The storm raged above them, but here, beneath the surface, there was an eerie calm. Ixara, ever the warrior, led the way as they navigated the ruinous facility. Her 3 eyes scanned the surroundings, alert for any danger. "This place is older than it looks," Ixara said, her voice a low murmur. "My people built many installations like this during the war. But this one, it has been abandoned for centuries." Elena surveyed the area carefully, her instincts as a soldier kicking in. "So why is there still energy here? If this was abandoned, what could still be running?" Ixara's expression darkened. "I do not know, but I fear what you are about to uncover. There are things buried here that should never be found." The group moved deeper into the facility, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. They passed through what appeared to be old laboratories, the remnants of research that had been long abandoned. The air smelled of decay, and the faint glow of dying machinery illuminated the path ahead. At the far end of the facility, they reached a large chamber. In the center was a massive control panel, its screens flickering with static. Above it, an enormous, cylindrical structure hummed with a strange energy. "Captain," Garrick said, his voice tight with suspicion, "this isn't just a research facility. This looks like a weapon." Elena's heart skipped a beat. She stepped forward, her mind racing. The energy signature they had detected was coming from this very chamber. The radiation levels were spiking now, much higher than before. Whatever this was, it was still active. "Ixara, what is this?" Elena demanded. "What are we dealing with?" Ixara hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "This was a weapon created during the war," she explained grimly. "A device designed to harness the planet's core energy and turn it into a devastating weapon capable of destroying entire fleets. But it was never used, until now." Elena's mind raced. If this weapon had been dormant all this time and was now coming online, it could mean the destruction of the entire planet. and anyone still on it. The Ardent wouldn't be able to reach them in time if the core destabilized. We need to shut it down, Elena said immediately. Park, can you interface with that control panel? Park moved quickly to the console, his fingers flying over the keys. I'll try, but the interface is ancient. It may take some time. A deep rumble reverberated through the walls, followed by a bright flash of light from the weapon's core. The energy levels spiked again, this time violently. Ixara, get your people to the shuttle, Elena commanded. We need to get off this planet now. But as Ixara turned to lead her people out, something far more ominous emerged from the shadows. Something that would force Elena and the Zothar to confront the true nature of their alliance. The rumbling shook the walls of the ancient facility, the noise growing louder as the weapon's core pulsed with unnatural energy. Elena's heart raced as she turned toward Ixara, who was already rallying her people, urging them toward the shuttle. The storm above continued its ferocious fury, and the air was thick with the smell of ozone and fear. Every instinct within Elena screamed to leave now, but they weren't out of the woods yet. The weapon was still online, and if they didn't disable it soon, the planet would be torn apart from the inside out. Park, Elena barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. How long do you need to disable it? Park was crouched at the control panel, his fingers dancing over the ancient console as sparks flew from its interface. It's hard to say, he replied, sweat beading on his forehead. This technology is centuries old and barely functional, but I might be able to override it if I can get a stable connection. Elena's gaze flicked to Ixara. The alien widow's face was set in a grim line, her usual calm demeanor replaced by palpable concern. Her people had already begun to file toward the shuttle, but Ixara hesitated, her gaze locked on the pulsing core of the weapon. We can't just leave it like this, Ixara said, her voice tight with fear. It has been dormant for too long. If we don't stop it, we risk not just this planet, but the rest of our people across the galaxy. Elena nodded, understanding the full scope of the danger. The Zothar weren't just fighting for survival on Zartha, they were fighting for their very place in the universe. The weapon could destabilize not just the planet, but the fragile alliances the Zothar had built with the other races, their future alliances in ruins. We won't leave until it's disabled, Elena said firmly. But we need to move quickly. Ixara looked torn, her attention split between her children, still recovering at the shuttle, and the weapon that threatened everything they held dear. Elena stepped closer to her, her voice soft yet determined. Go, she urged. I'll make sure this is handled. You need to be there for your people. Ixara hesitated, her expression conflicted. But after a long moment, she nodded. Be safe, Captain. The future of the Zothar depends on you. With that, Ixara turned and hurried toward the shuttle, leaving Elena and the team to face the weapon. Elena watched her go, a pang of sorrow and determination tightening in her chest. She had made her choice, and now it was time to see it through. The control room was filled with a low, constant hum as Park worked to interface with the weapon. The glowing core pulsed rhythmically, its energy signature growing more unstable by the second. Elena stood by his side, her hands clenched into fists. Time was running out. Come on, Park, Elena muttered under her breath, her eyes darting to the door. The storm outside raged louder, as if the planet itself was echoing its impending doom. The ground shook beneath them as seismic tremors ran through the planet's crust. I'm almost there, Park replied, his voice strained. But this is more complicated than I thought. There's a failsafe built into the system. If I don't disable it exactly, we'll trigger a full detonation. Elena's mind raced. The planet was already on the edge of collapse. The radiation levels in the atmosphere were increasing, and the environmental sensors were picking up signs of the core becoming volatile. If Park didn't succeed in the next few minutes, the weapon would turn Zartha into a graveyard for everyone on it. Just keep going, Elena urged. You can do this. Park's fingers moved faster, his eyes narrowing in concentration. Sweat streamed down his face, but he didn't falter. Elena stepped back and took a deep breath. The air inside the chamber was stifling, heavy with the scent of metal and the hum of volatile energy. Suddenly, a crackling voice came over their comms, cutting through the tension. It was Ixara. Elena, you need to hurry. There are Zothar soldiers coming, dozens of them. They're not happy about the alliance, and they want to stop you from shutting down the weapon. They'll be there in minutes. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She had feared this moment. The political fallout of her decision to accept Ixara's offer had been building. The faction of Zothar who disagreed with uniting with a human would never allow them to erase the weapon, their only means of protection. If they saw that weapon shut down, it would be seen as a direct surrender. They know we're here? Elena asked, her voice low and urgent. They know, Ixara replied. They've been tracking your movements ever since you landed on the planet. If you don't shut it down soon, we won't have a chance to escape. Elena exchanged a glance with Garrick. The situation was becoming critical. She had to make a choice. Shut down the weapon and risk an all-out confrontation with the rebels, or let the weapon activate and destroy them all. There was no middle ground. Park, you've got to finish this now, Elena shouted, her hand reaching for her blaster, readying herself for the fight that was about to unfold. We can't afford to wait any longer. I'm trying, Park said, his voice desperate. It's almost there. Just a few more seconds. The ground beneath them trembled again, more violently this time, and a loud metallic groan echoed from somewhere deep within the facility. The air crackled with the increasing energy from the weapon's core. Elena glanced toward the door. They're here, she said. Get it done, Park. The doors to the control room suddenly flew open, and a squad of heavily armored Zothar soldiers stormed in, their eyes cold and unyielding. The air became thick with tension as they raised their weapons, locking their sights on Elena and her team. Stop! You are not to tamper with the weapon. Their leader, a towering Zothar warrior, commanded, his voice like thunder. It is the only thing keeping our people from extinction. I can't let you turn it on, Elena shouted, stepping in front of Park, her blaster drawn. The soldier's gaze hardened. Then you will die here. With a swift motion, the soldier raised his weapon. Elena's finger tightened on the trigger, but before she could fire, a sharp crack rang out from the control panel. The weapon's core stuttered, then shut down. The energy field surrounding it flickered and dimmed as the power systems began to fail. The rumbling in the ground subsided, and the atmosphere seemed to clear in an instant. Park let out a breath of relief, collapsing back against the console. It's done, he gasped. The weapon's offline, but as the soldiers processed the change, a tense silence followed. The Zothar leader glared at Elena, then at his fallen weapon. We'll see if this truly saves us, he muttered. Then, his eyes met Ixara, standing in the doorway, her presence powerful and defiant. This planet is still yours to lose, Captain Quinn, the warrior said. But so is our future. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.